Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mrs. Picard Reviews. Today, we're going to talk about alleles and genes. We're going to do this by talking about the father of genetics, Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel was a Jesuit priest who focused on plants, and he studied the plants and he studied what he noticed different traits. Right? Just like we talk about traits, different physical features of human beings or different physical features of animals, Gregor Mendel was really interested in different physical features of plants. One type of plant that he spent many, many years studying were peas, right? Your regular delicious garden peas. And Gregor Mendel studied various traits. We're going to talk about one trait that he studied, which was the color of peas, right? It doesn't sound very exciting, but from his studies, we were able to learn what we know about modern genetics. Well, Gregor Mendel created some purebred plants. It means he bred several generations together and he got these purebred plants. So he crossed a purebred yellow pea with a purebred green pea. And when he did that, he noticed that all of the offspring plants, all of the peas that came from this crossing of a yellow and a green, he noticed that they were all yellow. He called this the F1 generation. And Gregor wasn't quite sure what was going on here, so he wanted to know some more. So he took two of these first generation yellow plants and he bred them again. And what he found was that the offspring of those two plants produced 75% yellow and 25% green. So in the second generation, the green peas showed up again, but only about 25% of the peas were green. What is going on here? What did Gregor Mendel notice? What he noticed was that it seemed that the yellow peas, the trait for being a yellow pea, was dominant over the trait for being a green pea. That when the yellow and the green were crossed together, the trait of being yellow masked or covered the green trait. Today, so Gregor called that being dominant. The trait that is covered up is called recessive. Today, we call these alleles. What do we mean when we talk about allele? We remember we get one copy of our genes from our mother and one copy of genes from our father. The different versions of those genes we call alleles. So a dominant allele is the version of a gene, in this case pea color, that masks or covers up another trait. The recessive allele is the version of the gene that is covered up by the dominant allele. Let's go back to talking about his pea plants. Gregor Mendel noticed that these were purebred plants. So today, we actually use letters to represent plants. So we're going to represent, for pea color, we're going to represent C for color. And we're going to use a capital C because we're talking about the dominant. This is the dominant one. And because this is purebred dominant, we're going to say that this pea plant had one copy of the dominant allele from the parent plant and another copy of the dominant allele from the other plant. This was purebred. What we call this now is homozygous, meaning an organism for a trait, for a gene, having matching alleles. So the purebred yellow pea was homozygous yellow, meaning it had matching alleles, had two dominant alleles. The purebred green plant was also homozygous with two recessive alleles. When the two purebred plants were crossed, they resulted in daughter plants that received one dominant allele from the parent, from the yellow parent, and one recessive allele from the green parent. The word that we use for an organism having different alleles is heterozygous. Hetero meaning different. So that first generation of pea plants, all four were heterozygous, having different alleles. They received one allele from their yellow parent and one allele from their green parent. Why are they yellow? Again, let's go back to dominant and recessive. They are yellow because whenever an organism has a dominant allele for that trait, it will have the dominant trait. In this case, a yellow pea color. Having the yellow pea color is something called a phenotype. Phenotype is the observable and measurable characteristic of an organism. For Gregor Mendel's peas, it was pea color. The phenotype of the first generation were yellow peas. That was their phenotype. It was observable and measurable characteristic. The combination of alleles, either having two dominant alleles, either having both copies of the dominant version of the gene, or having a dominant allele and a recessive allele, also making a yellow, or the combination of having two recessive alleles is the genotype. Genotype is the gene combination of an organism that determines the phenotype. So depending on the genotype combination, two dominant, a dominant and a recessive, or two recessive alleles will determine the phenotype of the organism, which is observable and measurable characteristic of the organism, in this case, pea plants.